This is Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to a new offering from the Sunday Book Review, which is the Sunday Book Review Authors Edition, where I visit with an author over his or her book about compliance, leadership, and best practices. Numerous folks have asked me to put on a book review podcast, so the Sunday Book Review Authors Edition will fill that slot. Thanks for listening. Today, I'm thrilled to have my good friend and colleague Mary Shirley talk about her new book, Living Your Best Compliance Life.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. And if you are watching this on YouTube, you will see Mary Shirley with me on this screen. Mary, first of all, welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate you having me here, and obviously a big fan of yours and the Compliance Podcast Network.
So, Mary, we are here to talk about your first solo book entitled Living Your Best Compliance Life, 65 Hacks and Cheat Codes to Level Up Your Ethics and Compliance Program. Well, that's a mouthful. Where did you come up with that title?
Yeah, it's a trend of mine to do books that are fairly lengthy in title. So what I wanted to do was leverage the Living Your Best Compliance Life branding that I had with my column at Corporate Compliance Insights, but also explain a little bit more about what the book is about. Because if you think about living your best compliance life, some people might think it's going to be more of a leisure, holistic person type book rather than some substantive compliance tips. And the long title is to try and help avoid disappointments, set expectations that the book, while it does contain some living your best compliance life elements in a section at the end, it's really about living your best compliance life as a compliance practitioner. How are you going to be effective in your day job, and how can you bring some freshness and innovation to the program that you currently have?
Rather than end with this, I wanted to start with this. Tell us about your publisher.
Interesting one. Okay. CI Press is a limb from the conglomerate Corporate Compliance Insights. And Corporate Compliance Insights began, I believe, over a decade ago as a media outlet for compliance. And one of my favorite things about it is that the owner of Corporate Compliance Insights, Sarah Haddon, has said that there will never be paywalls. The information and knowledge sharing there will always be accessible. And I think that's really important because as a practitioner who's not always had the budget to be able to do things that I would really like to do, there are a lot of ambitious people out there who really want to go above and beyond. And so having access to knowledge is really important. And so that's what Corporate Compliance Insights did at its beginnings. And it's branched out into publishing as well. So this book is the third title, and the fourth is coming hot on my tails out of CI Press. So it is a publishing house that centers really in our space in ethics and compliance. So the titles there are very much for the ethics and compliance practitioner.
So tell us about your writing style. I am fairly confident in saying you have a day job. And did you write at night? Did you get up early in the morning? How did you write?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I would take a step back and even say that I have not been confident about my writing skills. For me, I find that I write like I speak. And so for public speaking, that's tended to serve me well. It hasn't served me so well in written works. So I have tried very hard to improve my writing, and part of that has been challenging myself to do things like publish articles, because if I didn't work on it, then it wouldn't get addressed. The first thing I'd say about writing style is just doing my best with what I have and knowing that it's not a predominant strength of mine, but consciously working on it, listening to feedback from others, and as I guess cute as it sounds, really being authentic. So for me, speaking in a conversational tone rather than making things legalistic is how I've been able to survive as a compliance officer. And it's how I'm able to survive when talking to other compliance officers as well. We are naturally a stuffy sort of a function, and I'm not really a stuffy person. And so why hide that? That is a little bit about the style. And then in terms of how I approach the writing, I first started writing this book during the pandemic. And this was during a time where my commute, which pre-pandemic was 3 hours, was now reduced, and I'd say quite severely, given that I was living in an apartment in Boston. So it was not exactly a sprawling grounds. And whenever the mood took me, really, I always had in the back of my mind to be thinking about things in conversations with friends and colleagues in the space, to note things down as they came to me, and to remember to probe people more if they shared an idea that was interesting that I thought could be featured in the book. But I'm a no kids, no pets, no plants person, which I think gives me the unique opportunity to be able to leverage some of my time in ways that I appreciate that others are not necessarily able to. And so for me, it was any kind of time. My weekends, I spent a lot of time doing the drafting then. And then if an idea struck me in the middle of the day, just note that down to come back to later. So absolutely, anybody can do it. And I would say didn't just have a day job, but also the podcast and some other extracurricular bits and pieces as well. But I firmly believe that in relationships in life and in the projects that we have, everybody will make time for what's important to them, no matter how busy they are. And this was important to me.
So, Mary, in the table of contents, you have the listed chapters as program assessment, team building, culture and communications, a humane compliance function, out of the box storytelling and training. And I wanted to go through each one of those and just say a few words about each chapter. So let's start with program assessment. What did you want to communicate in this?
So program assessments are really the underlying foundation, aside from your code of conduct, of course, for your program. It directs you in terms of where to go. And it's especially important if you're a new compliance person entering a new organization where you don't know. It's a great way to steer yourself. There are certain elements of a compliance program that I really struggled with in terms of thinking, how can you level this up? Like due diligence, for example, does not really get a mention. And it's super important, but there's only really so much innovating, I believe, at this juncture of the evolution of compliance programs that we can do with due diligence, for example. So program assessments, there's a little bit more around the focus being thinking a bit more broadly about your program assessments and how you can gather information to help you assess your current stance, gap analysis, and which direction to go in next.
How about team building?
Team building was a really important one to me, and I think I wouldn't have said that as much if we hadn't been through the pandemic. For me, I was managing a team in a completely different continent, and it really brought home how important it was to take a dedicated and conscious focus on team building, far more so than perhaps we've ever done before. And this was particularly important when you come in as a manager to a team that's far away, that you don't know at all, that you haven't dealt with them in previous areas of the compliance program. And so spending specific time to get to know people in the absence of the organic bumping up against each other in the kitchen in an office was, I think, something that warranted its own dedicated chapter that may not have necessarily, even though I do think interpersonal relationships and teams are critical, I'm not sure that had we had the pandemic, whether it would have ended up being a chapter in and of itself.
The next chapter listed is culture and communications.
Yeah,
Tell us about culture and communications.
This one, I think, is one of the broadest ones in order for us to be able to get new ideas on. It's as far as your imagination will let you go. And the culture one, I think, is particularly important because there was a CEB, which is now Gartner survey done several years ago now, I think around about 2016, where compliance officers nominated their primary goal of their compliance program. And the majority of people said that it was to foster a culture of integrity. And so around about that time, I started conducting research with my peers to find out what is it exactly that people are doing to help promote and measure a culture of integrity in their compliance programs. Because if it's such a big goal, if it's something that the majority are prioritizing, then surely there are going to be a lot of initiatives around it. And what I found was that it was the complete opposite. People were only dealing with it in a very ad hoc way, if they did deal with it, or they were mistakenly considering their compliance week, for example, to be a culture of integrity initiative. And so that is an area that I think there is plenty of advancement that we could do in this space to genuinely measure and promote our culture of integrity. And so that chapter is around how we can do that, deploying things like using tone from the top in a different way to how we have historically, for example.
A humane compliance function. Aren't we all humane?
Yeah.
And aren't we purer than Caesar's wife?
Yeah, I think there has been such a big shift towards that particular aspect of compliance. It may be the single biggest shift that we've seen in the last few decades of people understanding that we really aren't the sheriff's office, that we get paid more money than to just say no to people as our default robot response. A trained chimpanzee could possibly do that. So instead, the humane function is not so much about saying and me advocating for being a humane function. It's more about sharing ideas of people like ourselves that have found ways to let their authentic, true self shine through in compliance programs. And one of the biggest challenges of that can be that even though we have come to accept that compliance is not supposed to be an overly stuffy, formal, legalistic function, but I think there is still quite a bit of hesitation when it comes to doing something a little bit outside the box, or something that is perceived to be a little silly and maybe not so much compliancy. And dealing with the pushback that we may get and encouraging our colleagues to feel the fear and do it anyway, to use a cliche, is an important part of that chapter.
Given that discussion and definition, what is the chapter on out of the box about?
Yeah, so out of the box is a little less about being authentic necessarily, and really thinking about ways in which you can challenge how compliance has been perceived and viewed in the past. So these are really different ways of thinking about enhancing your compliance program and function. So doing things that may even be a little bit kooky are embedded in that concept.
So your final two chapters are entitled Storytelling and Training. And I've put those together for a reason, because I first wanted to ask you to compare and contrast how storytelling can either be different or used in training, and then ask you to detail a little bit about each chapter.
Yeah, storytelling is often used to great effect as part of our training and education arsenal, I think. We know, and this is not even just necessarily scientifically, but we know from trial and error that people do tend to listen to us better when we're able to share not even necessarily a piece of ourselves, but a piece of something that's familiar or that they can relate to as part of a story. It seems to be a really effective way to communicate a message. And so compliance officers have been embracing this for quite some time. So again, nothing new from me saying, hey, let's use storytelling. The purpose of the book chapter here and my overarching concept is that one of the things that I struggle with when it comes to attending, say, webinars or conference sessions or listening to a podcast is I can't stand when people just say, oh, just do this. And that's like a magic answer to everything. So me saying, oh, just tell stories. The point of this book is to share very specific examples. And you don't necessarily have to take the exact example and run with it, but it's just to be able to envisage when someone says, oh, this is a new way to, so for example, I said before, taking a different spin on Tone from the Top. But the idea of the book is to actually go through examples of how you can do that. So I find that when resource materials are missing the ways in which you can teach people how to do it, that's a big gap. So the storytelling chapter is not about, again, like advocating for telling stories. We already know that this is an effective way to get across information. It's more about how can a compliance officer who may not have their own personal library of stories at the ready for the same audience, how can they broaden the way in which they tell stories? How can they think about getting the message across in ways that they haven't necessarily tried yet? Alternatives, suggestions, examples.
So let me go to a couple of other points I really wanted to raise with you, Mary. The first is this, as in the title, it says 65 hacks. And I'm going to say that's 65 tips that you can use. I'm a huge proponent of giving tips out. Why did you but why did you use that as a strategy for communicating information through your book? And maybe you find that useful going forward and you're just communicating how useful you find it.
Yeah. When thinking about the concept of the book generally, I wanted to do something that was different to what was already on bookshelves. And Tom, you're a great example of someone who has written fairly prolifically about the nuts and bolts of compliance programs. Christy Grant Hart has talked about a 360-degree person, right? The holistic compliance practitioner and some of the necessary skills needed to be successful in the role. And I thought, going back to basic economics, it's not going to serve me very well if I do something that somebody else has already adequately covered for the compliance community. So what can I do that would be of value and different? And what I chanced upon in my mind when this finally hit me was specific examples of things that people can take into their own compliance programs, but very importantly, that do not come at a massive investment or cost, or that one person alone can't really achieve. And that's because there are so few of us that have all of the resources that we want to have, that have all of the budget available. And so I wanted this book to speak to me, the me's of the world, who are your everyday person with your everyday skill set, not overflowing with budget, sometimes a one-man band, sometimes not, depending on which part of your career and the job acceptances that you've had, how you can do your job better, leveraging off the crowdsourcing of others.
You've also got some pretty cool other hacks in there, such as downloadable forms and QR codes that will take the reader to other resources. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, absolutely. So the publisher's website at Corporate Compliance Insights, there is a page that is specifically dedicated to the book. And Tom, I'll supply you with a link to that for the show notes. And at that link, there is a free resource guide, which is essentially a package of worksheets that are associated with ideas in the book, so that you have a more robust way in which you can structure and organize some of the ideas from the book, and that they're already written out for you. So again, it's lazy of me to say, hey, just do this. I created some worksheets to help people really think through. And I'm not going to say that I'm the best at things. I'm certainly not. But these are starting points for you. So you can take my worksheets and level up on them yourself, make them suitable for your program, your environment, your organization and culture.
I'd like to take a little bit deeper dive into one part of your book I found particularly intriguing, mainly because I never thought about it. And that's the week of Compliance Week. You really put a lot of detail into how a CO, a compliance professional, and indeed a corporate compliance function can use the week of Compliance Week. So I wanted to maybe explore that just specifically with you because it so intrigued me. I guess, number one, why do you find the week of Compliance Week to be something that can be so powerful? And two or three of the strategies you advocate in the book that a compliance professional can do exactly as you said, at little or no cost, with little or no resources.
Thank you. First, I want to say that is such a massive compliment for me. I know that as a less experienced practitioner, I learned so much from you over the years, and it was important to me to always tell you this. So it is such a big deal for me to hear from you that there was something in my book that you hadn't thought of before. Thinking about Compliance Week, I think Compliance Week can often be underutilized. And so the biggest message that I would ask our compliance practitioner colleagues and peers to take home with them is Compliance Week is really a great opportunity for you to learn more about your organization and how you can better serve your internal clients, remembering that at our very core, we are a customer service function. And so using Compliance Week as a two-way feedback mechanism is one of my favorite ways to make the most of that particular time. And how you can do that can be very easily embedded into the Compliance Week activities themselves. So examples of this might be that in order for someone to play a game, they need to earn certain tools in order to be able to play. So thinking about a ring toss. So I've had a game in the past where we utilized alcoholic and non-alcoholic, like wine and fizzy drinks, to throw a ring over the neck of the bottle. And the number of bottles that you successfully get the ring over the neck of the bottle, you take that bottle home with you. But in order to be able to earn the rings in the first place, you need to answer compliance questions. And a couple of different angles you can think about here. The first is to utilize it for a KPI test on the level of absorption of your compliance training. So look back over a recent specialized training or a general training for everybody. General training is typically better if it's everybody from the business. And think about what learning objectives you had, and then test for those in your quiz questions. Another thing that you can do is look for a gap analysis in terms of the absolute most simple baseline information that you think everybody should know about. So, for example, where can I find the compliance policies? Referring to the name of your compliance hotline and saying, what is this? What is the name of the chief compliance officer? That kind of thing, where, a lot of people, I think, assume that, oh, everybody knows this, don't they? The reality is that probably not. No matter how many times you've trained on it, there are going to be gaps. And that is truly sobering, but it's important information for you to have in order to be able to close those gaps. And so an example of one that we ran one year was finding out information that a lot of people got the answer wrong of what is the name of the chief compliance officer. So take that information for the next year's compliance week and think about how can we communicate this information in a fun way. And how we did it was we turned our chief compliance officer, who was Lisa Estrada at the time, and we turned her into Flat Lisa, which is reminiscent of Flat Stanley. And if you're a former American child, you're probably familiar with Flat Stanley. I was not, but had the culture explained to me, this little idea that you can really take this portable around with you, this portable Flat Stanley. So we sent out a photo of Lisa, obviously mentioning her name, and said, take a selfie with yourself and Lisa, and then caption it with a compliance-themed caption. And so the idea of that activity was to get people to put the face to the name, remembering who the chief compliance officer was, because that was a gap for us to remediate it, and turn it into something fun and different, kind of outside the box, right? Like, how many Flat Stanleys do you normally see in the compliance function? And we got a really great level of engagement from people wanting to participate. So one of the strange things I have found that doesn't seem intuitive to me is that sometimes with Compliance Week, if you make some fairly high hurdles for people to jump through, like asking them to submit videos, create songs about compliance and perform them, people will actually do it. It's wild. And so maybe I'm just super lazy at heart, but it didn't occur to me that there would be so much interest and submission when you level up the ask that you have of your business to participate. They will come through for you.
And now let me move to the number one insight, because it's so simple and it's so elegant and it's so beautiful. And I'm just pissed off. I didn't think of this. I can't believe I didn't. I've looked at the same thing as you have for I don't know how long, and you figured it out. And that is that Compliance Week is a two-way street of communication. It's not simply a communication from the compliance function to the employees. It's also an opportunity for communication back. And so tell me specifically about that and how a compliance professional, a chief compliance officer, or a compliance function can really use Compliance Week as a way to get information, to get feedback, to get concerns from your customer base, your employees, to incorporate over the next 12 months.
Absolutely. So this is extremely low tech for those of you who do not have hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend. And it can be as simple as putting up easels, whiteboards, and having a big question up the top, saying something that you really want to know. So the first thing you need to consider is, okay, we have limited real estate of people's attention and time when they're participating in Compliance Week. Let's prioritize what it is that we're really interested in learning about. So in an organization that I worked for in the past, people were really dead set on the belief that we've got to communicate with our colleagues by a different forum to email, because people are so annoyed that they get emails all the time and their inboxes are really full, and oh, that must be a pain. And so I thought, why don't we just ask how people would like to receive communications from compliance? And interestingly, the overwhelming majority said email. And so what's critical to bear in mind here is that it, in fact, may be completely true that people do hate overflowing inboxes and they feel like they have too many emails. It can also be true at the very same time that they want to hear from us via email because that is the best way in which they know that they'll catch us, or whatever their reason is. I don't really necessarily care what their reason is, but I do care about listening to my customer. And so insights like that, finding out, should we keep doing things the way that we've always done them? In the case of email, apparently yes, for that particular business unit. Other information like thinking about how you might feel like you've really worked hard at shedding the reputation of being the sheriff. And maybe you want to test for that because we know that self-awareness isn't great with human beings. And so you can put up a question along the lines of, what is the first word that comes to mind for you when you think of compliance? And in one organization, the word that went up was the word no. And this is from a particular compliance team that was very self-assured and confident that they were an extremely advanced compliance department that was well up streets ahead of everybody else. And that information was, again, sobering. So Compliance Week is a really great opportunity to find out where you still need to do more work, but you must go into it being humble and with humility. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to learn that information.
Mary, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but could you tell our listeners when the book will be released and where they can get it after it's released in either format?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. It'll be sold on Kindle, on Amazon, and also paperback, which can be accessed on Amazon. The paperback goes live for a sale on the 15th of August, not long now. And the Kindle is already available for pre-order. Just a simple click will get you there. And if you're interested in bulk orders going to one destination, I can help you out with some mates rates, as we'd say in New Zealand. So you can hit me up directly if you'd like to have a bulk order of 10 or more books for your team or clients or booth swag, whatever it is.
If someone wanted to contact you, what would be the best way for them to do, Mary?
You can reach me, Mary, at greatwomen, which is plural, incompliance.com.
Well, Mary, congratulations on your first solo book. I greatly enjoyed reading the copy that you sent me, and I'm looking forward to putting some of your advice into practice.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you for having me.
This is Tom Fox again. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of SBR, the Authors Podcast. I hope you enjoyed my visit with Mary Shirley. She's obviously a good friend, a great colleague, and an important part of the compliance community. So I hope you'll check out her book. I've had the chance to read it, and it's great. SBR, the Authors Podcast, is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.